Thank you all very much for coming along to today's joint meeting of the West of England Combined Authority and our joint committee. Very warm welcome to everybody here today in Bristol. My thanks through Marvin, Mike to Bristol City Council and all the officers who make today's meeting possible. Just before we start, I'd just like to run round some quick introductions. Whilst my friends here have their nameplates in front of them, I appreciate not everybody might be able to read them. So very quickly from my left, delighted we're joined today by Councillor Toby Savage, who's the leader of South Gloucestershire Council and the Deputy Mayor of the Combined Authority. Councillor Dino Cuzzetto, the leader of Bath and North East Somerset Council. Councillor Don Davis, the leader of North Somerset, and Mayor Marvin Rees from Bristol City Council. So, as I just touched on a little earlier, some of you may have attended earlier meetings where we have held effectively two meetings with a gap in between. We are constantly talking about how we improve, how we operate. So today, for the first time, we will be running things slightly differently. Please, we do recognise, and it is important that everybody understands that the Combined Authority Committee and the Joint Committee are separate, however related bodies. So today we will effectively be running rather than running two consecutive meetings, we're holding a joint meeting. There will be a little element when we come to looking at recommendations and voting that will be carefully managed to ensure that everything still acts in line with our constitutions. So please bear with us as we work out how we move these things forward. We hope these are going to be positive moves for everybody involved. And if that is the case, well, we will then be looking as to how we extend this in the future. This also means that both the chairman of the LEP, even though he sent his apologies today, and our scrutiny committee are able to attend but one meeting. And in terms of some of our visitors and members of the public who sometimes put statements to both committees, it allows everybody in that space to be more efficient and speed up. Also worth bearing in mind, please, that we will therefore be doubling the individual times that were spent for statements from members of the public to make sure that that sum is still the same as it was previously. So a couple of just housekeeping notices, as is always the case. If some of you were here a little earlier, you may have heard a fire alarm test at 10 o'clock. I'm assured by my friends here that there are no further fire drills planned today. So in the event of a fire, please take direction from Bristol City staff who will assist us all with the evacuation. And please do not return to the building and instructed to do so by the official fire wardens. You also notice that this meeting is being recorded. A recording will subsequently be available on our website following the meeting. But please, it's really important. If anybody has any concerns or issues about being filmed, please would they make themselves known now at this point in time to our colleagues here. I note for the record there isn't anybody expressing concerns, but should you be called to speak and you subsequently change your mind, please let us know beforehand and we'll make sure that's the case. Wonderful. Well, thank you very much indeed. So from an agenda perspective, that's item 1 concluded. Item 2 is apologies for absence. We have received one apology from Professor Stephen West, who's the chair of our local enterprise partnership. Other than that, I'm delighted all the other members are here today. Item 3 is declarations of interest under the Localism Act of 2011. This is where I ask members if they have any such declarations regarding any items on the agenda, and if so, please could they highlight which they are. I note for the record that there are no declarations of interest. Thank you. Therefore, we move neatly on to minutes of the previous meeting. The minutes of the previous meetings of both the Combined Authority Committee and the Joint Committee held on the 4th of October have been circulated with the meeting papers. Members, were there any comments you'd like to make regarding the accuracy of those minutes? As there aren't, are you happy for me to sign them for the record? I see nothing but nods, so thank you very much. Perfect. So that was regarding, for the record, both the minutes of the Joint Committee and of the Combined Authority. Thank you. So moving on to just a few brief announcements. It's always nice to take this opportunity just to share with everybody just a little bit of the work that's been taking place since we've all met previously. We have now started taking on board comments from the public consultation. We've published the Joint Local Transport Plan 4, which sets out the region's vision for transport up to 2036 and shows how we aim to achieve a well-connected, sustainable transport network that works for residents across the whole region, and a network that offers far greater realistic travel choices, makes walking, cycling, public transport the natural way to travel. And we'll be talking a little later about some of the initiatives around our future ambitions around mass rapid transit and so on. Really key in that aspect is our plans for Metro West Phase 1. We've reached some really key milestones with the submission of the formal acceptance of the Development Control Order application for the Government's Planning Prospectorate around Metro West Phase 1. Appreciate to some people that might not really sound terribly exciting, but from us delivering our transformational rail services across the region, this is a huge step forward. And those major investments in our public transport network are going to see improvements to rail services right across the region, from Bristol, Hembury, Severn Beach, Portishead, and so much more. So really important times for us in that space. Tying in both the official opening of the Channel 4 Creative Hub recently that Marvin was hosting, and the announcement around BBC's Natural History Department, bringing even more jobs to our region. I was extremely proud to have launched 2 new programmes to help our amazing creative businesses to grow and offer more career opportunities to people across the whole region. Our Creative Scale-Up scheme, which we launched last week, gives creative businesses bespoke support to help them grow their businesses, become ready to take on investment. This is a global sector. We are recognised around the world in the incredible businesses we have here. We're all very, very committed to ensure that this new industry of which we're at the forefront continues to be providing jobs and opportunities for everybody across the region. And some incredible case studies and people that we're meeting along that journey. So that's really exciting times. And as we've touched on already, the really positive news for us all around Channel 4's Creative Hub and the BBC's continued investment in our region. And touching very briefly in terms of that skills and agenda, we were really pleased that together with Be the Business, the Combined Authority has launched a new Mentoring for Growth programme. This is a new collaboration that will help small and medium-sized businesses in our region to grow by connecting them with business leaders from large multinational companies. And it just shows how we can bring together the expertise that exists in this region and make sure we're constantly helping and supporting businesses to start, succeed, thrive and prosper. And is one small part of a lot of the other initiatives we have around our growth hub and lots of other facilities that go on. Really pleased as well to say that we've had a great response to our Green Business Grant Scheme, with lots of applications from businesses who are keen to benefit from the £1 million fund to help businesses make their buildings and activities even more energy efficient, thereby helping protect the climate and the environment upon which we and future generations depend. And we're also supporting renewable energy generation in local communities through over £500,000 via the West of England Local Energy Scheme. And this again is currently seeking applications. So please, if you have any, please share that news. Applications are open until the end of next month. So grants of up to £100,000 are available through the South West Rural Community Energy Fund, from the South West Energy Hub, again, which is all led via us here. So lots of work going on through the Combined Authority, coordinating how we coordinate and help in terms of decarbonisation in so many different ways. So from there we will move on now, please, to item 6, items from the public. We had received 37 questions at the close of the deadlines for questions to this committee. As usual, written answers have been sent to all of the questioners.
Chair, why will you not hear questions in public? What do you fear? Why will you not answer these questions in public?
Sorry, I'm just going, please, we always try to operate a very, very respectful and managed meeting here. Please, making statements from the floor without being invited is really not the way for us to behave. Well, no, I'm just going to close this down now, thank you. Our constitution is very...
No interest at all in their opinion. We know what you're about.
So, after that, I'd just like to make it very clear, please, that our constitution does not allow supplementary questions. That is agreed by everybody. Thank you. On that basis, we're going to move on. So, statements, we've received 53 statements. Now, Shazia is going to help us manage those. We are going to call people in terms with how we operate. Please note we have an hour for this. Shazia is always wonderful in helping me manage people's times. Not sure how many people are here.
We have 11 speakers.
Okay. So in that case, our constitution allows for up to 3 minutes per speaker. So I'm comfortable we're going to be allowing everybody the opportunity who's submitted a statement to speak up to 3 minutes. As is normally the case, Shazia will remind me when there's a minute left, and I'll remind you then. Again, I ask everybody to be respectful of those procedures because that affects everybody involved in this space. So, please excuse me not necessarily having correct titles, but the first person I have on my list is Liz Rees. Rees or Rees, I'm not sure. So, our colleague at the top has a microphone. Please note that we have received your statements. There is no need for you to read your statement in full to us should you not wish. Thank you. Your time starts now.
I am a mum with 3 young children living in Bath and am part of the fast-growing group FACE, Family Action on the Climate Emergency. On the 8th of October 2018, the UN gave us a clear warning that we have just 12 years to tackle the climate emergency. Since reading the IPCC report, my whole outlook on life has changed. Every day I face the same dilemma. Should I just enjoy being with my children today or focus on looking after their lives tomorrow? It's hard to get the balance right sometimes. Maybe it's an impossible challenge, but I know one thing that would help me enormously, and that is if our national and local governments started to act on their climate emergency declarations rather than simply carrying on with business as usual. I was heartened to learn that WECA declared a climate emergency in July last year, but talk is cheap, and I haven't seen or read anything which would suggest real change is happening. Why has WECA not opposed the expansion of Bristol Airport? Aircraft emissions are estimated to cause around 16,000 premature deaths each year, of which 4,000 are from emissions during takeoff and landing, which affect communities next to airports. You cannot endorse the expansion of the airport at the same time as really acknowledging and understanding that there is a climate emergency. What does climate emergency mean? It means that my children's future is threatened. When David Attenborough says the end of civilization in our children's lifetime, that means almost incomprehensible disaster. No organised healthcare, no organised government, no organised anything, just chaos, soon. This could well be a future that our children try to survive in. Do you understand this? WECA needs to make real investment in public transport, to end sky-high train fares and to make the green option always the cheapest and easiest option. It costs our family £15 to take the bus less than a mile into the centre of Bath, which is considerably more than the cost of parking. We also need investment in better walking and cycling provision and to rethink road space. We need more footpaths, more cycle paths crossing the city centre, more safe places to cross and better connectivity between spaces. Another area that desperately needs investment is cycle storage. Many people live in buildings where it's difficult to have a bike. I would also urge you to consider setting up school streets where roads around schools are blocked from traffic at drop-off and pick-up times. Whether we like to hear it or not, our children are currently being poisoned by cars. I have already made changes to my lifestyle to reduce my carbon footprint, However, I know that there is a limit to what I can do individually to avert the looming disaster. What we need is bold, urgent action at local and governmental level, and that is what I have come here today to ask you to do. There is no time to lose, and we are relying on you. The climate emergency needs to be at the heart of every decision that you make.
Thank you very much indeed. And I'll remind everybody at the end, but thank you for your statement, and all the comments are noted and are with the members. Yep. Sorry, Dino, I was going to call next one.
Of course, it would be the big button. Thank you very much for your statement. I was just quite interested in what you expect WECA to be able to do to actually help address the climate emergency.
So let's just be clear, please, and whilst we always welcome comments, please, in terms of the time we have, it really is important, please, that we respect the rest of the meeting, but Dina's very welcome to pose that question for a short answer.
Well, first and foremost, I'd like to see WECA oppose the expansion of Bristol Airport, which I think is very important.
Thank you. Okay, in that case, please, may we move on to, I believe Jayne Paxton is here. Jayne,
Hello,
sorry,
yeah.
thank you. I'm never quite sure where we all are. Hello.
I'm Jayne Paxton. I'm also a resident of
3
Bath.
minutes starting now. Yeah.
Just before Christmas, I went to an event hosted by the leading charity, the British Lung Foundation. This was part of a conference, a British Thoracic Society conference in London, concerned mostly with medical conditions affecting the lungs. And the strong and clear message from both these organisations is that one of the major contributors to lung disease is air pollution. Here are some of the facts presented by a British Lung Foundation professor from papers that have been recently published in scientific journals. Of the 4 main sources of air pollution, road transport is by far the most significant source of pollution, and the majority is created by emissions from diesel vehicles. 3 out of the top 5 causes of health problems are directly linked to air pollution, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, lower respiratory tract infections and asthma. And also, new research commissioned by the British Heart Foundation estimates that up to 11,000 heart and circulatory disease deaths in the UK every year are attributable to particulate air pollution. Air pollution due to noxious emissions and particulates provokes spikes in hospital admissions and GP visits. The researchers I listened to likened people with lung conditions to canaries in the coal mine, as they are the first to be affected by air pollution. In Scotland, as in a so-called low pollution area, they looked at the impact of air pollution fluctuations on the health status of 300,000 adults and children, and found that pollution levels correlated with spikes in hospital admissions. But the good thing is that there is evidence that reducing air pollution reduces the health risks, and some studies that looked at shutting down traffic around the Olympic Games in several cities showed that there was a reduction in hospital admissions as a result. These frightening statistics have obviously hit home because in the past month, Brighton, Bristol, Birmingham and York have all signalled the end of the road for cars and other vehicles. Greater Manchester Combined Authority has this week unveiled an ambitious plan for a joined-up cycling and walking network that could provide a national
1 minute left.
blueprint. A report from one of our own local universities, Bath, says that the inconvenient truth is that we all have a role to play in accelerating action on air pollution, and they avoid trying to do 3 things: avoid, shift and improve. I'm sure that WECA citizens who are concerned about air pollution will decide to make changes, but we can only do it if the options to change our behaviour are available to us. So my question is, why can't WECA be bold when it comes to its transport plans? Why are they planning to invest in road improvements rather than cycle lanes and walking routes? Why do we not have bigger fleets of electric buses that connect our towns and cities? When will rail travel be frequent and affordable? When will our local cities and towns become truly clean air zones? When will we consider...
Thank you. May I ask you to bring it to close?
Cars, and when can we be sure that our children are not the canaries in the coal mine?
Again, thank you very much for your statement. As I say, it's been shared with everybody and will form part of the minutes for the meeting. Good. I believe the next person here is, excuse my eyesight, is it Hilary Byrne? Byrne or Bunn, I'm not sure. Your surname, please excuse if I haven't pronounced it correctly. Hello.
Hi.
3 minutes and we'll let you know when there's a minute left.
I'm speaking for Cleve Parish Council and the Parish Council Airport Association, which are based in North Somerset. The remit for the Parish Council Airport Association, which Cleve is in, is that we can consult with all neighbouring authorities on the airport and MPs. This is because the activities of the airport are cross-boundary from its impacts, and that is air pollution, noise and carbon emissions. But carbon emissions is not only cross-boundary, it's local, global. It's going to affect everybody here and abroad. So we are asking you today to change the WECA letter of January 2019 from support to objection. And I'm going to give you the 3 reasons now. 1, the letter is totally out of date. You mentioned the Joint Spatial Plan. North Somerset Council, Baines, have already left the Joint Spatial Plan. So it's not effective, it's going to be changed. It's out of date. Secondly, you've declared a climate emergency in July, and you never mentioned that in your letter. In fact, you never mentioned one word about carbon emissions in a letter of support. Thirdly, it's a combined authority. You're writing for all the authorities, and that's not the case because Baines has objected to the planning application. So you cannot say it is a combined letter anymore. So for 3 good reasons, you can change your letter from support to objection. And that is what Cleve Parish Council is asking you, and the Parish Council Airport Association, which now has 27 parishes in it, and Keynsham Town Council. And we are spread over 3 different districts.
Thank you. You have 1 minute left.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. And again, as we say, all your comments and your statement are noted. So I believe Tim Waite might be with us. Is Tim here? Thank you.
Tim Weeks, Friends of Suburban Bristol Railways. When the 2 extra tracks were restored on Filton Bank, we thought that was going to improve local train services. Since December 2019, cross-city stopping trains now stop short at Filton Abbey Wood. We don't know whether this is a timetable problem, a signalling problem, a problem with the software, a problem with the junction, but it means that people in some of the poorest communities in Bristol no longer have easy access to education and opportunities around Parkway. They have to stop at Filton Abbey Wood during the day. So we would please ask, can you put pressure on the DFT and the train operators to restore these services from the May 2020 timetable? Metro West Phase 1, we welcome the DCO for the Portishead line. That is brilliant news. We would not want to do anything that would potentially trip that up. But we just question why there is no plan in there or any kind of provision for a station at Ashton. There is a major stadium there where there are plans for Western Harbour. It seems an obvious place to have a station. Can we ensure that nothing is done that will prevent that happening? A half-hourly train service to Avonmouth. Again, we don't understand why that can't happen straight away. And it will make a big difference on the Severn Beach line. We had a 3-week blockade in November 2018 when there were no trains on that line, and the difference that made locally where I live was enormous. You would be amazed how much difference a few trains make along a railway line. Can we go half-hourly from the May timetable? Portway Parkway, the question on that just has to be how hard...
1 minute left, sir.
So double tracking on the Severn Beach line, again, can you please initiate discussions around that? A few trains make a big difference. YTL and the Filton Diamond, this is... YTL want to run trains from Parkway. The obvious place for those to go is round the Henbury Loop. You need to get discussions going with the port company to sort out the level crossing at Avonmouth, because that will affect the whole of northwest Bristol. And finally, very quickly, on the joint spatial plan, so I have to skip forward a bit because we're running out of time. I'm just going to go straight forward to roads, actually, because I'm not the first person to mention this, but WECA, in the WECA area, there is a plan to spend over £500 million on roads. Every metre of new road means more cars, means more greenhouse gases. Every pound spent on road is an investment in worsening climate change.
So, thank you.
Let's
3 minutes.
do that.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. So, I now have an apology to make, because we normally try to do these in order of when we have received the statements. Don, I'm so sorry. I beg your pardon. I didn't sit by you.
Could I just say I wholeheartedly support what the Fosborough person has said, but as I declared I am a member of Fosborough, and I do think that we need to be pressurising First Great Western and government to prioritise local rail over long distance, incredibly expensive travel to London, because I think we are missing a trick here big time. Because the capacity that WECA has invested in and the local authorities should be about addressing local transport need rather than getting people to London very quickly.
Don, thank you very much. So, in that case, please, I am awfully sorry, Dave. You were number 8, but we hadn't ticked you as being here, which is absolutely remiss, given I can see you and smart. So, Dave, for your first comment, you know the form. Just before we start, may I welcome you back? I'm very conscious a lot of your friends at Mindful we haven't seen as much of you as late as we enjoy, but very welcome, delighted to see you. You know the score, you've got your first 3 minutes.
Would it help if I put the mic down, Chair?
Handheld's just coming down, Dave.
Thanks very much, David Richwell. Represent various transport user groups, but I want to talk particularly about the 1st of April, because the 1st of April is very important to public transport users in the southwest and particularly in WECA. That's the day in which the bus services transfer from the local authorities under a joint parliament, the Act of Parliament, to WECA, and WECA takes over as the supported service authority. That's very, very important, because at the moment we don't have enough money to run buses. You know, First does its best with Stagecoach to run the commercial network, but the supported network is diminishing, whether you're in North East Somerset, whether you're in South Gloucestershire, or whether you're in Bristol. We have some of the poorest communities now without any bus service after 6:30 at night, coming out of Bath, Medina, into the Kingswood area and across to Cribs. The last time anybody can work, Marvin, in some of the poorest parts of Hillfields, is to leave Cribs Causeway at 8:20 at night. To go back, these kids are stuck with taxis, all sorts of problems, because 3 authorities haven't got the resources together to fund what is the 18 and 19 bus, which needs a urgent evening evening support, really. And the supported services were the late journeys, the 21:45 off of Bath Toby up towards where you live, and the 23:20 Marvin from Cribs as far as Warmley. Now Hillfields is poor. They don't have money for taxis. Staple Hill is poor. Parts of Bath are poor. They don't have money for taxis. And yet we have a situation in this city region where we're losing bus services. And it is not acceptable. Now Marvin, thankfully, I'm a member of his transport board, deal with the equality stuff. Very proud to do that job for him. Hopefully do that for you as well too. But Marvin stepped in, thankfully, thanks to the board, and he's rescued the South Bristol buses. But I believe it's only till October. So we've got South Bristol buses rescued in 36, 96, 91, 92. And I'm grateful to the Mayor and the work of his board to do that. But we could have some of the most deprived communities with no buses in the evenings in Bristol. in October.
1 minute left, Dave.
Okay, and I'm very, very concerned that we sort this one out, and WECA has to step up. And also, we need to get the officers over quicker. It's not happening quick enough to see them. We need to bring the rail officers into one unit so we can sort these issues out. The Western to Parkway train is a very example of that. We can't have people spreading Yate, Western Supermare, and in Bath. They need to all be in one location working for WECA. And the quicker we do that, the better. And North Somerset needs to join.
Dave, thank you very much. Welcome back. Dina, was there anything you'd like to add?
Yes, and I'm fairly sure I know the answer to this. As David's correctly pointed out, bus services are reducing across the area, not just in areas in the urban areas, but also in rural areas. And I just wondered whether David is also lobbying government to amend the 1985 Transport Act so that actually we can have more powers over what is in effect a commercial service.
On the 2017 Department for Transport Buses Act, which gives this authority, WECA, not the councils, powers to bring in quality contracts, franchising, and as many powers as you want over buses, but of course you need the resources to fund them. I'm acutely aware that we need to bid for government money in this area for buses. Boris Johnson loves buses, that's his view. He says he's a bus nut. He's got money in budgets, first time ever, though we've seen it since the Labour Liberal administrations in London, the Lib Dem Tory administration. We've had some real money put back into buses. But it's a bidding process. I believe it's 250 million, 20 million for rural. I don't know from David Carter whether we have bids in. We need transparency with the public transport forums, the scrutiny, and with the WECA bodies so that public interest groups can get involved in looking at this and making sure with the Chief Executive we get the maximum amount of money for WECA. And we'll work with you, certainly, to make sure that happens.
Dave, thank you very much. And yes, we appreciate your support. Toby, was there anything you'd like to add?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, David, for your statement. It wasn't something that you repeated in your verbal comments, but within your written statement, you referred to the council having withdrawn funding to those bus services. Actually, the level of subsidy that we're providing now is more than it was when it was the 19 and 19A. So we'd just like that factual point to be put on the record.
Good, thank you for clarifying that, and we'll make sure that's recorded in the minute. Yeah. Good. Thank you. In that case, the next person who's my notes say is here is John Adams. Mr. Adams here. Oh, right, thank you. Tim. Just where's... Oh, there's Tim. Just to your left, please, Tim. Thank you. Mr. Adams, you've gathered 3 minutes and we'll let you know when there's a minute left.
Thank you. I represent the Stop Bristol Airport expansion campaign based in North Somerset, but with many members across the WECA constituencies. Thank you for allowing me to submit this statement. In July 2019, the WECA declared a climate emergency, committing the West of England to carbon neutrality by 2030. Today, it will be considering an update report from the West of England Local Enterprise Partnership that clearly sets out the immediate challenge to the authority posed by the climate emergency. For technical reasons, the LEP update omits specific reference to the planned expansion of Bristol Airport and indeed any emission from aviation. However, Bristol Airport cannot be removed from the life of the region as it's lived. Airport expansion represents a massive source of additional greenhouse gas emissions, which would obliterate all regional efforts to reach net zero emissions by 2030. Carbon offsetting schemes, such as that proposed by the airport, do not lift or remove a single gram of carbon from the region. Through the prism of the LEP report, and for reasons given in my written statement, it's clear that the airport application is unnecessary. At its present size, it serves the business community and reasonable leisure needs of the region perfectly well. It is premature International and national legislation and protocols on climate emergency are on the move, and WECA itself is in the early stages of preparing an evidence-based climate emergency action plan. The application is indefensible, given the collateral damage to the health and well-being of communities from greenhouse gas emissions, increased night flights, and harm to wildlife and the natural environment, not to mention the green belts that will be covered in parking. The application is unsustainable. North Somerset officers working on this have just recommended acceptance of the plan. They are working in a policy vacuum, which has been filled by a sleek, ruthless airport. The planning officer, the councillors are the only people who fill that policy vacuum. They need your support. I'm therefore calling on this meeting to show political leadership now and table and vote on a motion expressing opposition to airport expansion now.
Thank you very much for your statement and comments, sir. In that case, I believe Mr. John Mountford. Is Mr. Mountford with us? Tim, just here.
My name is John Mountford. I'm a retired primary school head teacher and a former Ofsted inspector. In discussing the climate crisis and the airport expansion, I have 3 questions I would like to put to you. Firstly, who are we? In his novel, Ishmael, by Daniel Quinn, which tells of an encounter between a man and a silverback gorilla, we are described as the takers. So then my second question, how have we come to be as we are today? In his novel, Quinn offers us an answer. Ishmael finds a student to save the planet. The student is told about 2 coexisting cultures, the takers and the leavers. The takers are the agriculturists who appeared about 11 or 12,000 years ago. The leavers are the hunter-gatherers, represented still today by the indigenous peoples of the world. Quinn accuses the takers of exploiting nature, subjugating other species, and damaging the planet by enacting a story that the world was made for man. In 1989, Bill McGibbon wrote the following in The End of Nature. We are at the end of nature. By this I do not mean the end of the world. Though they may change dramatically, the rain will still fall and the sun shine. I'm very emotional about this because I have a grandson who this matters to. I think I may not be able to go on, in fact. I would end my submission by just asking 3 things of you. We have to admit that we are enacting the wrong story. We need to be able to change our minds. We must adapt like the leavers, or we have no future for our children. So I ask today that we begin by declaring a new story through a new understanding of who we are. We are not the owners of the world. We share this great planet with all other species, with all other nations. Thank you very much.
Thank you again, sir, for your statement and comments. In that case, I believe, is it Steve Melia? Again, my apologies if I mispronounce your surname. Thank you. Oh, good.
Thank you. As some of you know, I lecture and research in sustainable transport. Next Saturday, I will be speaking to the Parliamentary Climate Assembly in Birmingham about decarbonising transport, and that's what I want to talk to you about now. The written statement, which you've all got, I should point out, I wrote that just before the publication of the new version of the Joint Local Transport Plan, which I've now had the chance to read. And what a strange document it is. as though it was written by two groups of people on completely different planets. One group that is emphasising that all four authorities have declared climate emergencies and saying that WECA is committed to achieving net zero by 2030, and the other group determined to carry on as before, only with more road building. Now, basically, there are only two ways in which you can decarbonise surface transport. You either electrify, possibly hydrogen, and or you reduce the volumes of traffic. Now, at the moment, the pace of electrification is happening much too slowly. There will be a lot of pressure on national government to try to accelerate that, but there's no way that that is going to happen fast enough to do all of this. And in any case, there's very, very little that local authorities can do about that. So for local authorities declaring climate emergencies, that just leaves traffic reduction. Now, the most important message I want to give you is this, that improving public transport on its own does very little to reduce traffic or reduce carbon emissions. If you expand public transport...
1 minute left, sir.
And you also expand road capacity, then what you get is more movement and more carbon emissions. Now, if anyone doubts that, I'd be very happy to share whatever evidence you need, but I'd point out that your own officers are aware of this. In fact, Bristol, initial studies are suggesting that traffic would have to fall by something like 40% to achieve the City Council's climate targets. So, if you're going to do that or anything like it, we will need less road capacity, not more. All of the authorities face a choice. You can take your declarations seriously and aim to decarbonise by 2030, or you can carry on with what is in that plan, building and widening all of those roads, but you cannot do both.
Again, thank you for your statement and comments. Dino, was there anything you'd like to add?
Yes, thank you for your statement. I would believe, and I hope you will confirm this, that you would urge WECA and the West of England to get on with the next joint local transport plan as soon as possible.
Thank you.
Well, as I say, it's a very strange document. It contains two different things.
Could we look for a brief, perhaps, for a direct question? Could we have a direct answer, sir?
Yes, please don't do all the road building that's in that document.
Thank you. Good. Dave, very welcome to ask you to come back regarding your statement on behalf of the Bristol Disability Forum. Tim, could you pass the mic down, please?
Thank you. This is a slightly different topic, but very less, and it will also apply to the South Gloucestershire Forum, and there's colleagues from the room for this. Transport hate crime. Just recently, you may realise we've had a National Express driver beaten up at Bristol bus station. We had a booking clerk actually at First Bus beaten up at Bath bus station. And we have antisocial behaviour on our bus services and on our rail services, to which and Bath Bar bus station can be one of the worst, and as Marvin knows, so can Bristol bus station. There's also problems at UWE bus station, sometimes up at Cribbs Causeway and Western Supermare Town Centre. This is a real issue, and it needs more resources if WECA takes over the transport powers to be working with the Police and Crime Commissioner, with the British Transport Police and the Avonmouth and Somerset Police. Hate crime is not acceptable to anybody on the public transport network, day or night. We have cameras on our bus fleets. We have cameras on our stations. I would also plead with Keith Wharton in the room, you'll speak in a minute, that we've effectively also make sure that the programme of cameras that we've now fitted to Oldford Park and Keynsham, and we've fitted to most of our suburban stations, we continue the run up the Severn Beach line to Shirehampton, to Avonmouth, to St Andrews Road, Toby, and to Severn Beach. We must have safe stations. We cannot have hotspots. All our Metrobus system is cameraed. But is there enough police officers? Do we have enough revenue inspectors? Do we have a safer, stronger transport team? These are issues that WECA, as Public Transport Authority, which you will be from the 1st of April, need to have a conversation. I hope David Carter will be meeting his opposite number at the Avonmouth and Somerset Police and BTP to make sure that we move forward. And I hope the work by the panel in Bristol that Marvin has, which could be Ruth Pickersgill chairs, is continuing, and if broadened out, so WECA takes some of that responsibility. Because there's no room for hate on our public transport, and no room for BME hate, gay hate, or disability hate, or any pasture hate on our transport network. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask Tim now to go to the furthest person at the top of the public gallery, to Keith. Keith, as soon as Tim's brought his microphone up to you, we'd like to invite you to address the committees.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to briefly update the committee on the work of the Severn Side Commuter Rail Partnership. And can I first just say that CCTV will be going in at Avonmouth and at Severn Beach stations before the end of this financial year. This has been arranged through the partnership.
Thank you.
So during our time, we've sponsored and funded improvement work at half the stations in the region. At Yatton, Keynsham, Yate, completely new station at Severn Beach, and more recently at Avonmouth, replacing a derelict eyesore with a much more attractive new facilities and a new community garden. This makes a much better entrance for rail passengers to the enterprise area. So visitors coming get a much better impression from the station than they did before. We were very disappointed that the Access for All scheme for improving Nailsea Station was cancelled by the transport industry, by Network Rail and Great Western, because of the huge increase in costs. We have therefore been discussing with Great Western whether a smaller scheme, which partially addressed some of the most important issues, could be arranged. And we now have secured some funding for this, and we hope to develop some plans in conjunction with North Somerset and with the local community. We also work a lot with the disadvantaged passengers in our area and communities to encourage the use of the local trains. This has been very, very successful. So I'd just like to conclude by thanking the partnership, WECA, and the local authorities for all their interest in the partnership and for supporting us, and we hope this support will continue during the next few years. Thank you, Jim.
Keith, thank you very much, and please before I personally really appreciate the work and support that you give us, and also on behalf of all of us at the Combined Authority. So thank you very much. I believe the next one on my list, is there Mr. Alistair Hawk with us? Tim, to your left.
Hi. My young family and I live in the west of England, and after initially working with some of the largest companies in the UK, I now help businesses across the region with their strategies. I've come here today to talk about the climate emergency. I want to say two things to you. First of all, thank you for declaring a climate emergency last year. Clearly, I don't have to spell out to anyone here how critical this is for our futures. Neither do I have to spell out to you that the climate now consistently ranks as one of the key concerns for voters across the political spectrum. Secondly, and the thing that bothers me being here today, and when I've spent a bit of time looking at your documents around your strategy and observing how WECA impacts the region, I can see very little evidence of any meaningful action around the climate emergency. The UN's IPCC report's already been referenced today. That says the world has the ability, it has the technology to save us from the worst impacts of climate change. However, what the UN scientists say is they don't know if the policymakers of today have the will to drive the changes we so desperately need. Clearly, listening to the other people here today, none of us really think that is happening here either. The question earlier was, what should you do? And I mean, that's a staggering question, but I will answer it for you. You need to report on the impact of every decision you make and what impact that has on the climate. You publish lots of reports about the economics impact, a quarterly skills report, quarterly economic bulletins. There's nothing yet about the climate really there. The grand challenges report you publish has a quarter of it with some desktop research about businesses in the region, and that's really back-patting of yourselves. You need to start taking this seriously. You need to report on what the climate impact of every decision you make, not just walking and cycling, but the impacts of your road building, your planning reform, what the airport will do to the region, and public transport decisions, to name a few. The idea that there can be modest grants given for tiny clean technology companies, while public transport is archaic, the airport capacity is growing, and planning has little appreciation for the climate emergency that you yourselves have acknowledged is not the legacy people in public office should be leaving behind for our children. You've got the ability, like other regions are, to become a model for the rest of the UK and the world in tackling climate emergency. You've already identified that this is a region perfectly placed for a local fight back against these huge challenges we face. So I urge you, with everything you do, you have to put the climate emergency front and centre of those decisions. Turn the taps on for funding for better, cleaner public transport.
1 minute left, sir.
Stand against the airport expansion. Focus your planning on sustainability and do this for the sake of your voters and their children. Being here today, I can see this is an institution that is failing in its duties. You're not doing enough. You're failing in your duties to your voters and to your children, and you are hearing that from pretty much every speaker up here. I want you to start taking this seriously. You've got a real test in the next few weeks about the airport expansion. I'm looking at your faces from up here. I don't see that this is going in properly. This is an emergency. Either when you said it was emergency, you were doing so to fob off your voters, or you believe it is emergency and you should start acting as if it is one. I urge you, for my children, start taking this seriously.
Thank you very much. Jolly good. Dina, was there anything you'd like to comment on?
Yes, I just wanted to add, so as I'm sure you're already aware, in Bath and North East Somerset we have done just that and have embedded the climate emergency within all the decisions that we take. So I assume you're hoping that something similar could happen here at WECA too.
Thank you for that. Oblige me with this little story. When Bath and North East Somerset were debating the climate emergency in their council meeting, someone asked a question. They said, who has all the control about, it was the funding for transport and the region. And one of the councillors said, it's WECA. This is on the internet, you can watch it. And councillors from both sides, all across the political spectrum, spontaneously burst into laughter. And someone showed me this and they said, why? I said, why are they laughing? And the person said, they don't believe WECA is going to do anything about this. And it's not funny. It's not funny. I mean, people are dying already from this, and our children's lives will be horrendously impacted if people don't start, the public bodies don't start taking it seriously and acting, taking the climate in everything they do. If you go home tonight and you continue to say the airport expansion is a good idea, then shame on you.
So, sir, if I may, in answer... So very quickly, Councillor Romero asked you a direct question. I appreciate you then made another statement, but I'd ask you to refer to the paper that's coming up shortly around climate change, where we will be talking about doing that. So just like to make that point to you now. Marvin, was there anything else you'd like to add? Marvin, would you like to?
Just say, in terms of what is going on, I don't know how familiar you are with Bristol, but it's worth looking at the climate strategy for Bristol and the work of the Environment and Sustainability Board and the Climate Advisory Panel. Any areas in which you feel there's a shortfall, you absolutely welcome to put those in through those panels, and they then put those outcomes that we're looking for and the initiatives we're looking for into the Bristol One City Plan, which is something that's endorsed by the whole city. So it's not just a local authority approach, it's looking at all the institutions in Bristol that shape life, our universities that are small towns, my health service who manage huge amounts of estates, and also This is not an attack on the National Health Service, right? This is a conversation that we've had with Simon Stevens, generate huge numbers of road journeys, yeah, by staff and by patients. And so they need to look at their transport plans. So wherever you feel there's an absence, you can please feel free to step into that space and contribute. Those are independent bodies shaping city leadership. You might also, I would also suggest that we've obviously taken quite bold action on our clean air zones in Bristol that include a CAS-C, but also a small area diesel ban. Probably worth looking at how we all, which is in our powers, look at how we manage road movements within the city as well, and how serious we are or not about cleaning up air quality. But you'd be welcome to input to that.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Marvin, for making your point. Smashing. Thank you very much indeed. We're now going to move on to, is Jackie Head with us? Hello, thank you, Tim. I wonder if our friend managing the camera, would you mind just taking, Ian, do you mind helping us there? Thank you.
Thank you. I am here to ask if you will make a stand as a combined authority against the expansion of Bristol Airport. You will be aware of the airport's arguments for expansion, and some of you may even have already read the officer's report recommending approval. You are probably aware of the New Economics Foundation report criticising the validity of the airport's claims and recommending the planning application is not approved. You will know there are thousands of objections from local people, and you might have seen the recent Friends of the Earth report pointing to the craziness of facilitating increased carbon being put into flight by approving expansion. The point I would like to make is this. We know that people living under flight paths are more likely to experience sleeping difficulty, more likely to have respiratory difficulties and serious diseases, and that their babies are more likely to have lower birth weight and physical difficulties. We know they already experience traffic congestion, air pollution, and noise pollution directly attributable to carbon emissions from flying. We know that many communities within WECA are under the flight path of Bristol Airport already. Each plane that flies is a unit of carbon burnt, and each unit of carbon burnt impacts on local people and beyond the local area too, contributing to global warming, loss of biodiversity, and the extinction of species. The balance is fragile. How, when we know this delicate balance, can we even consider airport expansion? Your local authorities and many of your local individual parishes have declared a climate emergency. If you stand against the if you do not stand against the airport expansion, then this means nothing. I know that you are not the direct decision makers about the airport expansion, but North Somerset Council need to hear from you in a clear and unequivocal way. The councillors need to know that you have your hand on their back as they decide to take the courageous decision to go against the officer's
support. You have half a minute left.
And reject the planning applications. Other councils have done this, stopping Southampton and Stansted. Becoming ill and disabled over 2 years ago has given me a profound understanding of human frailty, and it's made the sap rise in me to help protect this beautiful planet. I am here to remind you of our human frailty and to ask you to make a public stand against the expansion of the airport.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. The next person on my list who I believe is here is Richard Baxter. So,
Can I just say that my fellow citizens up here have spoke eloquently and passionately about what I was going to say. They've taken all my lines. I hope that it's not just a case of, yes, we note your comments, thank you very much, now go away. Because that's the impression that I'm getting. There's been a lot of asks here for you to change your minds about the Bristol Airport expansion. WECA, I'm thinking, wow, electorate cheated again. Because I've heard the terms, we declare a climate emergency so many times. I was here in this chamber when Bristol City Council declared that back in November 2018. I came away so elated, along with my friends, and I just feel that I've been let down. Again, I was in London with Extinction Rebellion in April 2019. And after that, the government said, we declare a climate emergency. And I just feel that I've been let down and cheated, not just me, but my fellow campaigners. And it's because we've been out on the streets, and just remind you why there's a gathering outside today. It would normally be the youth climate strikes on the last Friday of a month. You know, it's their future that we are talking about. And today we've got a group of people from all over the region that are actually going to be marching to say what's on my t-shirt, stop airport expansion. So I'm asking you, I'm imploring you to resubmit your letter. And in keeping with your declaration of a climate emergency, oppose the airport before the 6th of February. I think we've said it all. Just act like it's a climate emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Baxter. Tim was checking earlier to see who was here who'd submitted statements. We understand from the list I had earlier that was everybody. Was there anybody else who submitted one of the 53 statements who hasn't been called? Thank you very much, and Tim, appreciate your efficiency in ticking that off. In that case, please, we now move to agenda item 7, and that's where I ask members if there are any petitions that they wish to present. I note for the record that there aren't. Item 8 on our standard items is comments from the Chair of the Local Enterprise Partnership. I gave the apologies earlier for Professor Steve West, so he's not with us today. I always like to just record our appreciation for all the work that he does and all the work that the members of our business board on the LEP do. So thank you. That takes us to item 9, which is comments from the Chair of the Combined Authorities Overview and Scrutiny Commission. I'm pleased that Councillor Clark's with us, so as always.
Thank you, Chair. We considered the papers for this meeting, and we spent a lot of our time talking about the climate emergency planning documentation. Over the last 2 years, I think Scrutiny have tried to be very supportive of this organisation, but in this case we found that more difficult, is fair to say. And interestingly, this wasn't just the usual suspects on the Commission who had strong opinions about this. One person quoted the dictionary definition of emergency, the climate emergency. So emergency is a threat to life, property or environment which calls for immediate action. Well, WECA declared a climate emergency in July 2009, as you know, and my Commission don't consider that WECA has responded adequately using these papers, in these papers. I think our overall opinion, I mean, you've seen my detailed report, I think our overall opinion was that there isn't enough urgency or there isn't enough resources. So we've got a number of recommendations that I'd like to pass on in this meeting. There's talk about, or there's a proposed climate emergency action plan. Well, we need to know when we're going to get that. The timing is obviously vital. We talked about the governance of this issue within WECA. The proposal contained in the papers, as I understood it, was that our scrutiny commission should be, quote, champion of the environment. Well, frankly, we don't have the resources or the skills to be able to do that. We may have the motivation, but we actually aren't able to take on that role. We consider that WECA needs a climate emergency group, a board. We suggest respectfully that that might comprise of the cabinet leads from each of the local authorities. But we think there should be a board of some sort. We consider that one of the benefits of this, apart from, I think, every major issue, particularly an issue like this, needs a champion, is that this would stop each authority reinventing the wheel. Bristol, for example, which I know most about, being a councillor in Bristol, has done some great work on trying to understand what a real pathway through to carbon neutral 2030 would be. The CSE have produced a fantastic report. Now, I'm sure that informally that information is being spread amongst the unitary authorities, but I think there should be a formal process to make sure that happens. Or sorry, my commission thinks there should be a formal process to make that happen. We think, as well as that, we also think the WECA needs an officer to be in charge of this. We think there should be an officer appointment. It shouldn't just be spread around amongst existing officers. And that leads me on to resources, really. We think that 250,000, which is the amounts stated in the report, is entirely inadequate. I know there's money being spent within the projects. I absolutely get that, or we absolutely get that, but we think that's completely inadequate. Again, coming to Bristol, Bristol has effectively put aside £3 million to deal with this issue, not to deal with the issue, but to understand the issue and to plan our response. And we think strongly that WECA should put aside more money. In terms of the major schemes list, we understand, we get that those have included a lot of provisions which are an attempt to help with the climate emergency. We absolutely get that. But we note that the major schemes list and the prioritisation of that major scheme list was put together before a climate emergency was declared. Our next recommendation is that that prioritisation process is revisited. That might mean perhaps slightly less priority for roads and slightly more priority for park and rides and other provisions that could help with the climate emergency. I'm speaking in quite strong tones because the feeling of the Commission was quite strong. Yeah. Lastly, we would invite the Mayor to come to one of our meetings specifically to talk about this issue and to hopefully reassure us that enough work is being done on this issue. Thank you.
Councillor Carr, thank you very much for sharing your comments on behalf of our Scrutiny Commission. So much appreciated, and our thanks to you and your colleagues for the work that they put in. Item 10 is then regarding comments from the Combined Authority Board. I beg your pardon, sorry Marvin, I'm so sorry. Dina. Okay.
So thank you for the work that you do and for your recommendations. I wanted to just ask you a little bit about what other tools you felt scrutiny could have in order to be able to hold WECA better to account, particularly over climate and climate change.
I think if an officer was appointed as we recommended, we would invite him to come to our meetings to effectively give us updates on what was happening. We're all motivated around this issue, but as I said, we don't have the resources, we don't have the time, and we don't have the skills. But we need to understand what's happening within WECA, and if an officer was appointed, that could help us to do so.
Thank you. Marvin, any thoughts?
I just to say a couple of things about the structure, and I think you kind of referenced here, and I really appreciate you raising that. Firstly, we did set up a Bristol Advisory Committee on Climate Change. which is made up of experts from our universities and chaired by a professor from UE and a professor from University of Bristol as well. And the idea of that panel is a mirror of the national panel to be able to speak into all the work that goes across our thematic boards within the city office, and to be that source of expertise. So we had a meeting, for example, where our education and skills board was saying, well, we want to do something on this, but what do we do? Where do we get the expertise? And that panel is there to speak into that. So I'm sure they won't mind me saying, in the name of that there would be a standing offer for neighbouring authorities and commodity to reach into to that expertise. And also to say, in terms of getting some of that joined up, we've established the Environment and Sustainability Board in the city that's mapped out, a whole series of outcomes and actions we want all up to 2050, and has done the work of with the climate strategy we've developed about crunching the numbers and the actions around getting to carbon neutrality by 2030. Some of those challenges are pretty comprehensive, actually. So, for example, one of those is that we'd have to change all the gas boilers over to heat source. It's about 70,000 of them, right? So that's not just about spending money, that's about accessing people's homes. It's a huge logistical challenge as well. So when you talk about evidence, that's one of the key things. We need, one of the points that Alex Minshaw, who leads on this work for us, has said, when you have an emergency, and we have an emergency protocol in Bristol about viruses, explosions and so forth, you do need action. But what you don't need is people running around in the air just taking any action. Right? You need evidence-based intervention to make sure you're not making a situation worse. So the drive to get that evidence has been done. And we actually do have cross-border representation on that ES board, looking at the interdependence between Bristol, North Somerset and South Glos now, to make sure we're getting the join up over that long term. And I'm sure that the boards are more than willing, and I co-chair the ES board, to strengthen that relationship in the future, and particularly working with the leadership of WECA.
Marvin, thank you very much. Don, was there anything you'd like to add?
I welcome the statement from Steve and his team. Having sat on that committee previously, I'm pleased that progress is being made. I have a slight query, though, in what you say, in the sense that one of the speakers said we do have a climate emergency. And I think we actually need to look at our infrastructure, and perhaps your board could scrutinise this. In fact, we do have a road infrastructure available. It's how we use it, because we can actually get potentially electric buses or even low emission buses running. The secret is to use the road infrastructure, any road infrastructure we now construct, to prioritise public transport over the car, isn't it? Because the rail delivery in this area has been appallingly slow. So if we are going to do things, I think we do need to use the roads, but use the roads for public transport rather than just for cars.
Don, thank you, Don. Dina, was there anything else you'd like to add?
Yes, it was a kind of a procedural question, really. And it was to ask what happens to these recommendations, because I think the scrutiny panel have made some very sensible points, and it would be useful for us to know, as well as scrutiny and the public to know what happens next.
Thank you. And again, as is always the case with this, yes, we will then go back through officer groups, political groups, and consider those suggestions. Marvin, is there anything you'd like to come back?
Yeah, there was just one final point. Sorry, and I missed it off there. So we've, over the last few months, coming out of the Environment and Sustainability Board, a real concern was raised about the ecological emergency as well. So about, in our November meeting, a member of the board said, the danger with the climate emergency declaration is it can ignore the ecological emergency, and you can solve climate without taking account of species extinction. So I think it'd be quite good to complement, and they're complementary declarations. So I think it'd be really helpful to complement the work you're doing around climate with the work around ecology as well, and feed that in.
Would you mind if I respond, Mayor Bowles, just briefly?
Very briefly, if you don't mind, Councillor.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with that, and I welcome that. I mean, just one specific point. You mentioned the boilers. So it's 96,000 individual heat pumps need to be installed in the next 10 years. The problem is nobody's trained to do them. Now, WECA have a skills budget, and that is a really practical way that you could make a difference. Retraining heat engineers, gas engineers to put in heat pumps and bringing through young people to do apprenticeships and engineers in this issue. 96,000 individual heat pumps.
Thank you, and I appreciate your point. And I know our head of business and skills, we regularly talk about how we start addressing that. Thank you. Sorry, Dino, was the last point?
Because having asked the question, I now realise I actually have the answer myself. So I understand that what we would normally do is we would take your recommendations to our next meeting, and then we would discuss that, and then we would come forward. And I would just like to stress that we come back with a response to these recommendations at our next public meeting.
So just be clear, yes, as with everything, it will go through the normal process. You're familiar, I think, about the processes and how we operate. So it would go back through those processes, through chief execs, back through us as well. So thank you. Jolly good. In that case, Councillor Clark, thank you. We'll now move on, please. We touched on the comments from the combined authority boards. Each of our 4 boards that respectively deal with planning and housing, business, skills and transport meet on a regular basis to look both at the work we do and approve through this committee, but also that's the opportunity, as Councillor Clark's just touched on, about how we explore how those skills for the future reflect what we need in the region. Those comments from each of those boards have been circulated, and again, please just bear in mind that Cabinet members from all of our constituent authorities sit on there, so that again is a medium in which people, through the councils as elected members, can feed their thoughts in. So those comments have all been shared, and our role today is to duly note those. So on that basis, thank you very much. So we now move on to the section of the meeting where the Joint Committee, including North Somerset, will consider 4 reports. And those are agenda items 11 to 14, which we as the Joint Committee are to consider under our formal remit there. So the first item there is item 11, the LEP and IBB Revenue Budget Outturn Report for April to December 2019. And this report presents the forecast revenue outturn budget for the West of England Joint Committee for the financial year 2019 to 20, based on actual data and for the period from April 2019 to December 2019. There are a number of key points in there, but I think members have all had lots of time to go through these reports. They've been through our various officer groups as well, and through all of our financial officers. So I'm very happy to move those recommendations, members. If I could look for a seconder, please. Thank you, Toby. Were there anything that members would like to speak to this item, please? Toby.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to comment specifically on the low carbon challenge fund that is referenced within the report, and I think important to link back to a lot of the public submissions that we've had today and how we tackle the climate emergency. We've had some really good engagement in that first call of the fund with our local businesses. Officers within the council have been into a number of our town centres and our high streets and working with traders and small business owners there to make sure that we are getting the widest possible participation with that funding, and just wanted to stress the importance of continuing to work with businesses of all sizes to help them to reduce their carbon footprints.
Good, thank you very much, and again, really good to see as you're confirming that interaction across the region. Any other comments, members? No? In that case, if we could now move on to the voting. So the recommendation for members of the Joint Committee is recommendation A, to approve £100,000 to be allocated from the LEP General Reserve to fund the continuation of support for businesses linked to Hinkley Point development. It's been moved and seconded. Members, may I ask you to vote on that recommendation? Are you all in favour? Thank you. I note for the record everybody is. Therefore, that is agreed. We are then asked to note recommendations B, C and D for noting. Members, are we happy to formally record they're duly noted? For the record, thank you. Item 12 then is the LEP and IBB Revenue Budget Setting Report for 2020-21, and this report asks the Joint Committee to consider and approve the budget in respect of the Local Enterprise Partnership and Invest Bristol and Bath for 2020-21. Again, those papers have been considered by all the officers and our finance team. I'm very happy to move those recommendations. If I could look for a seconder, please. Marvin, thank you. Members, was there anything you'd like to add or comment on around those? Don, yes, please.
Tim, I guess in terms of the comments from members of the public, under item 7, the climate change implications, I think it would be useful for future meetings to make those very much more specific. There are some questions there which I completely support. There may be others. Marvin's boards he's discussed may be able to recommend further questions, but I do think we need to be as explicit in those as we are in financial and risk implications.
Yep, thank you. Fair point. Any other comments, members? If we could just then move to the formal aspect in terms of voting. So recommendation E, members of the Joint Committee are asked to approve recommendation A. Please, would you indicate if you're in favour? I note for the record everybody is. Thank you. Item B, recommendation, has a slightly different voting arrangement, so I'm going to ask us to take item B separately again. Please, would I ask you to indicate if you are all in favour? I note for the record that everybody is, so that's carried. And then item C again has a slightly different voting arrangement. So recommendation C, please may I ask you to indicate if you're in favour of that. Note for the record, everybody is. Thank you. So all of those recommendations are agreed. Takes us on to item 13, the LEP One Front Door Funding Programme. And this report asks the Joint Committee to consider changes to schemes within the current programme. We look at this very carefully through our LEP, but also through all the constituency councils. Again, lots of work's gone on here. Our purpose today is to consider that report, to comment, and then to see if we're happy to recommend. I'm very happy to move the recommendations. May I look for a seconder, please? Thank you, Dina. Jolly good. Members, anything you'd like to raise or comment on that report, please? I think not. So, recommendations. 1, please would you indicate if you're in support of recommendation 1? I beg your pardon, I'm being advised very, very sensibly that 1, 2 and 3 are all the same voting arrangements. Are members happy if we take those on block? Thank you. Would I ask you to indicate if you're in favour? I note for the record everybody is. That's 1, 2 and 3. Slightly different voting arrangement for 4. And please may I ask you to indicate from the constituent councils if you're in favour of recommendation 4. Again, note for the record, everybody is. Thank you very much. It's moved very well so far in the different voting arrangements. I appreciate everybody for bearing with us on that. Item 14 then is the commissioning of a mass transit strategic outline business case. And this report provides an update on progress on this project and asks the Joint Committee to arrange to delegate the decision on the commissioning of the mass transit strategic outline business case. So again, very important piece of work in terms of our future planning around the importance of transport across the region. Lots of work being taken place in there across transport members through all the other directorates as well. So I'm very happy to move those recommendations. May I call for a seconder? Thank you, Toby. Members, is there anything you'd like to comment on that before we move forward? Dina, perhaps we could start with you and then Don.
Well, I think it would be of particular interest to most people, particularly members of the public, to know what really is meant by mass transit. And I appreciate that this is this is commissioning a piece of work looking at strategy, but I would like some reassurance of exactly when such a definition could be made clearer.
Jolly good. I'll just pick that up very quickly then, if I may, as we discussed a little earlier. Yes, there's work going on about how we actually agree and conclude that piece of work so that we can start sharing more about our vision in terms of what this means. So, as we were discussing earlier, that work's going on between the authorities at the moment, and that'll come forward soon. Thank you.
So, and when you say soon, is there any sense of, within a matter of X number of months?
That work is very close to coming forward. It is in shortly. I'm going to look for advice.
The communication will be mid next month.
So in terms of comms, yes, we're looking February/March. Okay. Thank you very much. Don, I think Don and then Toby, if we may. Go on, just in terms of how you indicated.
Yeah, I would very much welcome this proposal, and I hope it will go further than its the initial plan is. But I do think there is a vacuum, as Dina is alluding to, because nobody is saying what it might be. Lots of people are saying what they think it will be, and clearly there are certain lobbies, as we all know, and I'm probably part of them, on rail, bus, tram, cable car, underground, bus mass transit, as in South American cities and in Mexico City of late. There are lots of options, and even sort of rocket packs on the back. But until we start to fill that with some level of vision of what we think is achievable, then we are to some extent either it's the same old, or people's expectations we raise too high, and then we'll be disappointed. So I think I really welcome the idea that we get some vision very quickly as to what might be achievable. And those things are, I think, relatively practical, limited by the geology of the area in some ways. We do need to get something out of what we are actually considering for mass transit, because I really don't know what we are. Thank you.
Don, thank you very much. And I'm not going to repeat the various potential different types it could be, because you're right. Lots of different groups have got their own lobby and agenda around that. But that's really the key aspect of what's coming forward, both in terms of the comm piece. But also, that's why we are looking to appoint that consultant who is going to be able to do that really detailed work, to be able to help us look at what those real options are in terms of delivering that. But your points are well made. Thank you. Toby. Yes, thank you. We touched that. Thank you, Toby.
Chair, thank you. I'd wanted to welcome the report and the progress that we're making towards realising mass transit solutions in the west of England. We're obviously not in a position to rely on the outcomes of this work right now to be able to get our network moving and to encourage people to take more sustainable modes of transport. And I wanted to make particular reference to the open letter that came from James Freeman at First Bus, setting out the challenges that there particularly are on the ring road and the challenges being faced by our current rapid transit system, Metrobus. And just how essential it is that we move as quickly as we can to understand those concerns and what options may be available to us. So I'm pleased that because of decisions we've already taken and funding that we've already said is available, that we can move forward with that technical piece of work, that modelling work, to understand what the issues and options are for the ring road as a matter of urgency, so we can begin to address some of the concerns that have been put to us.
Toby, thank you very much. Is there anything anybody else would like to add? No? In that case, thank you. So, members, we're asked to delegate the decision to commission the Mass Transit Strategic Outline business case through the professional services framework to our Director of Infrastructure in consultation with the directors at the other constituent authorities. May I ask you to indicate if you're all happy with that recommendation? I note for the record you are. Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. Jolly good. So that concludes the items for consideration solely by the Joint Committee. In terms of making sure that this all follows the correct both legal and aspects, we're now going to move to the section of the meeting where the Combined Authority Committee and Joint Committee will jointly consider 3 reports, items 15 to 17, which are relevant to both committees' remits. And just to be clear, whilst the committees will discuss these items together, at the respective points where decisions are required, we will record separately the respective decisions that need to be made by each committee. For those who haven't been to previous meetings, what used to happen, we would have, through the first committee, considered these reports. We would have then had to go through the next committee and consider them all over again. So hopefully this improves the way we all operate. So that takes us, please, to item 15, which is an update on the climate emergency planning paper. And this report provides an update on the collaborative work taking place across the authorities on climate emergency planning. Lots of detail behind this. This is work that's taken place across all of the authorities in terms of officer groups. So again, really important part, but this was what we were asked as a committee to bring updates on what that work is. And that's the point regarding this particular report. Dina, you were itching to say something. So I was going to say, perhaps we could go through the correct process, yeah? So I'm now happy to move those recommendations as set out in the report. Technically, we need a seconder for that, please. As it's set out, technically we need a seconder, then we can consider amendments. Yeah? Thank you. Jolly good. So, Dina, was there something you would now like to add?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I would like to move an amendment, or would like to propose an amendment. And just to be clear, this is to the committee recommendations in item 15. So what I'd like to add is to add a 4, which is that the committee highlights the environmental impact of Bristol Airport and calls on government to provide the necessary support for combined authorities and local government, including local planning authorities, to lessen this environmental impact in line with WECA's climate emergency declaration. And my next amendment I'd like to add is 5, which is to note North Somerset Council is the local decision maker for planning applications relating to Bristol Airport. I'm sure I don't need to explain the reasoning behind wanting to add these. As you've heard previously from all of our speakers, there's some real concerns about Bristol Airport and
Thank you.
its future.
So can we just get back to process? Thank you very much, Dina. I am advised that this is going to relate to the recommendation that comes before the WECA element of what we're about to discuss. I've just been reminded. Now, I actually need to look for a seconder, please, to that amendment. Good. I understand that now the WECA members need to agree if we're happy to accept that amendment. I note that everybody is nodding. Therefore, that now forms part of the formal thinking. Correct? Thank you so far. Jolly good. I was just going to say, so now that we have the amended recommendations, would members like to comment, please? Marvin, should we start again?
I just think it's something about the nature of that interaction with government that we need clarity on. And it's one of the questions that certainly floats around, that what we need government to do is give us clarity on their approach to airport capacity in light of the declaration of climate emergency, and what they're going to be doing and how successful they're likely to be to decrease the number of people flying. I think that what goes on what the future impact or the implications of what happens at Bristol Airport is not in an abstract. It comes within the context of how likely government are to be successful at reducing the numbers of people flying, and what they will be doing with other airports, in particular, whether they will or will not be pursuing a strategy to increase the capacity of airports in the southeast. That combination of decisions is going to be the thing that we have to look at. The decision in isolation is obviously very important and will have a very powerful symbolic value, but the practical outworking, the practical consequences of that decision will be dependent on how it interacts with those other factors. One of the things I'll suggest in Bristol, and it's free anywhere else, is that scrutiny pick this up and really begin to run the numbers and develop a Bristol. Now, I'm always very wary about this because it's not for me to tell scrutiny what to do. I keep pointing out they set their own agenda and their own issues, but it is one I suggest and neighbours might wish to do the same. But we have to be thinking about all the moving parts around this decision so that we don't end up, so that we actually make a decision that nationally and globally benefits. The impact locally is a subtly but important different set of questions. But I'd just like to suggest that we put that in our communications with government.
Good. No, thank you, Marvin. Welcome that. Any other thoughts from anybody else on that? Right, Dina?
It's important to stress that this is not solely about more or less aircraft, but it's also about how people get to and from airports as well. And so I hope that point is also stressed in our communication.
Good point. Thank you very much. Toby, thank you very much.
The airport decision is in 10 days' time. All this debate will be worth.
So thank you. Toby.
Chair, thank you very much. Yeah, I welcome these recommendations. I think we've been very clear through the work that we've done to date on the emerging joint local transport plan about that environmental impact associated with those poor transport connections to and from the airport, and our needs as a combined authority working with North Somerset and with government to introduce a number of improvements to that. I think it's also really important to stress what our role is in that issue around airport expansion, and that is the sovereign decision-making power of the local planning authority, which in this case is North Somerset. So I just wanted to make those 2 points. Thank you.
Toby, thank you very much. In that case, if nothing else members would like to add, so thanks. Go on.
It's a substantive motion. And I just wanted to have some reassurance that this is not simply the last piece that we will, where we will talk about climate emergency, that actually it will become much more part and parcel of our everyday decision making.
If I may, if we actually look at the recommendations, which I hope you're about to agree, that is the case. Yes? Yeah. Okay.
And the invitation is there to participate in Environment and Sustainability Board with cross-border work. So it's a standing invitation for you to make sure you're part of that. And we welcome that, because we haven't been there so far.
I'm very interested in that.
Okay. Thank you very much. So in that case, please, we now need to move to the voting. Please note that we're going to be voting on the original recommendations plus the additions that have been agreed as the amendments. And in the first case, it's for the WECA committee members to vote on those recommendations. Please would you note, and I think it's a really important point for everybody, especially around point 1, that this was a report that's come forward on the work to date. Future reports, including the action plan, will be developed through our UAs, through each of our authorities, working at officer and politicians, and ultimately come back to this board. It's really important, as I've kept saying to lots of people, about the context of what this report's regarding. So that is in terms of what we are asked to note. We are actually asked to vote on items 2 and 3. For the record, I'm just happy that we're noting item 1. People are nodding, aren't they? Thank you. Therefore, we are to vote on items 2 and 3 from WECA. They are slightly different voting arrangements. Please would I ask you to indicate if you are in favour of recommendation 2. Note for the record, everybody is. On 3, please would members note if they are. Thank you. And on items 4 and 5, just for the purpose of the record, please indicate that the new recommendations are also approved. Thank you. Jolly good. From the Joint Committee's perspective, we are asked to duly note those items that they've come forward with the recommendations. Again, members, please just a nod to say we can formally say the Joint Committee has noted those. Wonderful. Thank you very much indeed. We now move to item 16, the Business Plan Quarter 3 Progress Report. Again, lots of work goes on an ongoing basis with all the officers from our local authorities and through the Combined Authority. And this is the latest progress report against the current year's business plans. Lots of information in there, lots of work goes on an ongoing basis. Our role here is to formally note that, but members, I'd just like to invite you if there was any comments you'd like to make about that report. I note for that. Thank you. Dina, go on.
Yes, I think it is important that the Climate Emergency Action Plan works in tandem with the business plan, and and that is considered in the delivery of all aspects of the business plan.
Thank you. And again, we've tried to touch on that in what we were recommending earlier. So thank you for your comment. Anything else members wanted to add? In that case, please, we have to do this in two sections. Firstly, may I ask the Combined Authority members to formally note that? I see that they all do. Secondly, we now need to ask everybody, including Don as the Joint Committee, to formally note. Again, I see nothing but nods. Thank you very much. That takes us now to item 17, the 2020-21 business plan. Again, this report sets out the 2020-21 business plan for approval by both committees. Again, a lot of detail in there. I'm very happy to move the recommendations as set out in the report. And I just need to formally ask for a seconder, please. Toby, thank you very much. Anything that members would like to comment on, discuss? Don, welcome in.
Well, to avoid sound like a stuck record, it would be useful again, as we have declared the climate emergency, to have that more explicitly stated in the papers, because we do financial risk. We ask lots of questions on page 100 and 101, but it would be useful if they were actually explicitly stated what we'd achieved or not achieved.
Thank you. Any other comments, members? No? In that case, please, I just need to look quickly with Shazia as how we need to do this. Voting, it's all right, I haven't turned the page over where you've given me the answers. So, Combined Authorities asked to approve. Please, can we just look for Combined Authority members formally just to indicate that? Thank you very much. Please, where we now look to formally ask everybody from the Joint Committee to approve. Thank you. I note everybody is. Wonderful. So that now concludes the business that was technically items that would have gone separately to both committees. And technically now the work for today that includes the Joint Committee has come to an end. Delighted if Don is able to stay with us as always. In that case, please, we now move to the final section of the meeting where the Combined Authority Committee will consider the remaining 6 reports, agenda items 18 to 23, which, as we said, is for the Combined Authority to consider in their own remit. Item 18 is the Combined Authority and Mayoral Budget Outturn Report for April to December 2019. Again, lots of information that's been shared both through our constituent councils and involved in the papers as well. We are asked to formally note that, but in the meantime I'd just invite any members if there are any comments they'd like to make. Dina.
We are on item 20, aren't we?
We're on 18.
So sorry, I got ahead of myself.
Thank you. Wonderful. Please, we are all asked if there's nothing else to add from a WECA perspective. Committee members happy to duly record that that is noted. Thank you. We're now going to item 19, the Mayoral Budget Setting Report for 2020-21. And again, this report seeks approval for a budget for the West of England Combined Authority mayoral functions for the coming year 2020-21. Again, I'm happy to move the recommendations. May I just look for a seconder, please? Thank you, Toby. Members, was there anything you'd like to discuss, mention or comment on around that report? Thank you. In that case, please, we have 2 recommendations. We need to take them in 2 separate forms. In terms of recommendation A, may I look to the WECA members to indicate if they are approving? Thank you. I note everybody is. And for item B, slightly separate voting arrangement, please again would you indicate if you are approving recommendation B. I know everybody is. Thank you very much. Item 20, Combined Authority Budget 2020-21 and Medium-Term Financial Forecast. Again, this report seeks approval from the Combined Authority members for that budget. Very happy to move that. If I could look for a seconder. Dina? Oh, sorry, yeah, thank you. So again, in terms of process, we've done that. Now may I ask members if they would like to make any comments?
Thank you, and I will now address the right item. And it's just a small comment really, which is to get some reassurance that WECA will continue to identify efficiencies to absorb the impacts of any overheads that relate to the transferred services, and obviously on an ongoing basis for 2021, etc. So it's just really to make sure that that is noted.
Lovely. Dina, thank you very much. It is duly noted. There's an awful lot of work goes on, as you know, in terms of bringing our transport functions together in integration. So yes, thank you. Point noted. Any other comments members would like to make? No, in that case, just for clarity, we do need to technically take recommendation 4 initially in terms of how the relation to voting needs to work. For item 4, please may I ask members to indicate if they are in approval. Thank you. So a unanimous vote required for that. We can now take the other recommendations. I am looking to Shazia to remind me if we can take them on block.
Yes.
I'm being told we are, if members are happy to take them on block. Take it we are. Thank you. May I ask you to indicate if you approve those other recommendations. For the record, I note that we are. Thank you very much. We now need to move on to item 21 on the agenda, the capital strategy, including treasury management and investment strategies. I'll repeat what I've said before. Huge amount of work goes on through our finance officers, the respective finance office across all of the authorities to produce this report for us today. And so this represents the capital strategy for the combined authority. So lots of detail in there, lots of work's gone on from everybody. Again, very happy to move that. Members, could I look formally for a seconder? Dean, are you nodding? You looked at me first, so we'll take it, thank you. May I look to any comments from members, please? No. So I haven't done my notes on this, so we're able to go. Right. Yes. Item A and B are for voting, aren't they? So may I look to members, please, if they're happy to take item A and B together. Are we happy to approve those recommendations? Yes, thank you for both of those. And then we are formally asked to note item C, or recommendation C. For the record, we have duly noted. Thank you very much. Item 22, our investment fund, and this supports out, this report sets out our latest investment fund proposals. And again, a huge amount of work goes into that, lots of work across authorities in so many areas, a lot of really exciting news in there. I'm very happy to move that. If I could look for a seconder, please. Thank you, Marvin. Very keen to see if members had any comments they'd like to raise regarding that paper. Toby.
Chair, thank you very much for that. So there are 3 elements to this report that I wanted to comment on. I'll start with the proposed master planning in the North Fringe that is proposed for funding approval. And this very much builds on the master planning work that we have already had approval for through WECA in the Kingswood area, through the Love Our High Streets project, and in the 8 area. And I think notwithstanding the challenges that we have around strategic planning for the area, we've got a number of large and already consented sites that we do need to ensure that we have control over the delivery of the infrastructure that's required to support those new and existing communities, particularly given the low carbon objectives that we have set ourselves. The north fringe of the Bristol urban area within South Gloucestershire has always been a very strong economic powerhouse for the region, world-leading businesses, expanding transport connections and a rapidly growing leisure and tourism offer. And I think particularly with Filton Airfield and the new neighbourhood there, proposals for an arena, I think the funding for that master planning work is going to be so important in ensuring that the new growth that we have there is centred around urban living, public realm and strategic transport improvements. So very much welcome that. I also wanted to comment on the digital engineering technology and innovation project, the full business case for which is set out in our papers. I've made references to the economic performance of this part of the region. Much of that is down to the aerospace, engineering and defence sectors that this geography hosts, stretching from UWE at Stoke Gifford to the Science Park at Emerson's Green, what we're now calling the South Gloucestershire Tech Arc. This project is about the future of those sectors, but also the growth of the design technologies for the supply chains and related sectors. It's been talked about for a long time under various guises, and I know that officers within the council and with WECA have been working closely with industry to bring forward this proposal as part of industry's response to the Brunel Challenge Fund. Through the National Composite Centre and Airbus, we already have collaboration around the Wing of Tomorrow. And actually it's this type of collaboration which is really exciting that the DETI project will look to grow. And again, with that strong and essential commitment to low carbon technology and clean energy. One of the things that we've all talked about as leaders before is the importance of growing and ensuring that we've got a powerful STEM offer for our children and young adults across the region to develop those skills and be those digital engineers of the future. So I'm really pleased as part of this work there is a comprehensive programme of engagement with schools, particularly focused around the less affluent parts of the west of England, that will begin this academic year and seeking to reach approximately 1,000 children. Finally, my final comments are just to welcome the grant approval through the Love Our High Streets project for the stabilisation works at the Whitfield Tabernacle in Kingswood. Really important catalyst for the wider regeneration of that part of the west of England. And finally doing some justice to the incredible history that there is associated with the tabernacle and that wider local area.
Debbie, thank you very much. I really appreciate your comments there. Marvin, was there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, two things. Just actually, it's timely in light of the conversation we had earlier on and that Dave raised about the challenges of transport poverty around Bristol. You know, we really welcome the full business case coming through for Lotley's sustainable transport improvements, both in terms of climate and accessibility. And we know Lotley's has long faced the challenge of being this almost isolated community and, you know, quite central to Bristol with few in and out roads. And so hugely important for one of our key drives in Bristol, which is about how we do inclusive economic development to make sure we bring everyone with us. Without that, we leave people behind. We sow the seeds for dissent as well as injustices. And secondly, also the funding for the full business case for the South Bristol Enterprise Support Project. Again, we have faced a decades-long imbalance in Bristol's economy with Bristol South again being left behind. And so the investment we can win to begin to invest in opportunity in the south of Bristol is hugely important for us building a coherent city. I'd say actually picking up on Toby's point, we recognise that these these relationships of economic inclusion are we are codependents on these actually, because we share communities on our borders. They may be in South Gloucester, they may be touching on Bristol, but we know that we have people that share their identities across the borders that can fall through the gaps and be left behind. So when we take this stuff seriously as we are now, it's incredibly welcome.
Good, Marvin. Thank you very much for your comments. Dino, is there anything you'd like to add?
Toby picked up on a lot of things which would apply equally as well to Bath and North East Somerset as they do to South Gloss. So I'm happy with what's been said.
Wonderful. Dino, that's very kind of you. In that case, we'll now move to the voting. Actually, no, technically I call for a recommend. Actually, remind me, Shazia, have we had a seconder yet?
Had a seconder.
We have, thank you. I haven't been ticking off my paras. So now it's moving to the voting. Note, members, there are actually 11 recommendations here, but we have the same voting for all 11. Are you happy if we take them all en bloc? Thank you. In that case, please, would you indicate if you are in favour of all of the 11 recommendations? And I note for the record that we all are. Thank you so much indeed. Item 23, the report on the Independent Remuneration Panel. And this sets out the most recent recommendations from our Independent Remuneration Panel. Again, lots of work has gone on there, so thank you to everybody involved in that. As I say, lots of independent people have come together to assess how we move forward in that space as a combined authority. Again, happy to move that. If I could look for a seconder. Marvin, thank you. Anything any members would like to add?
It's just we get on top of this. I mean, I was going to make a little quip about pay and how we talk about it, but the last time I did so, it set off a whole series of events that seem to be ushering in the reign of a North Korean leader, so I'll keep my comments to myself at this moment.
You're going to even it out across.
Thank you. Is there anything else anyone would like to add?
It's a comment similar to ones that I have made before about remuneration. I think if people are asked to do a job and it is an important enough role within the work of WECA, then it ought to be rewarded.
Thank you.
So I had an extra point then, which was to ask when you expected another independent remuneration review.
Report coming in June. Okay, I'm reliably advised there's a report coming in June. Thank you. So in that case, please, we are asked to accept 6 recommendations. I'm skimming quickly. I think we're all in the same boat again. They're all the same voting arrangements. Are members happy if we take them en bloc? Thank you. Please, would you indicate if you're in favour of all the recommendations? I note for the record everybody is. The final item on our agenda, as it always is, just before we draw to a close, is to note, please note that the details of any decisions taken at this meeting and the draft minutes of this meeting will be published on the Combined Authority website as soon as possible, as will the public statement submitted and the questions and replies. And that, friends, is everything that we need to conduct today. So my very, very warm thanks to everybody who's attended. Through Marvin, Ben and the officers, our thanks to everybody at Bristol who's made us so welcome. And on that note, I declare the meeting formally closed. What does your clock say? We always go by that at 12:33. Thank you all very much indeed.